Hi, Michelle. It's good to see you.
Hey, Mish, it's good to see you too.
And
Hi, good
Jasper's,
Jasper.
he's joining
Oh,
us. He's leaning
I
on me right now.
oh,
Yeah,
bless.
I know.
I'm so excited. Jasper gets to be part of our time today. I feel
I know.
blessed.
It's special. Thank you for saying yes to a conversation about COVID-19 and grief and all the things I know we'll talk about. I appreciate
Yes,
you.
yes. Thank you for
Yeah,
having me. It's always
yeah,
good to see your face.
I know. It's good to see you too. I would love for you to share some about who you are and what you do in the world, however you want to answer that question.
I know. Gotta love those questions, right? It's like, how do I shrink this down to my little elevator 2-minute speech? Most people know me by Mish. My legal name is Michelle Ashley, and I reside in Asheville, North Carolina. I'm a transplant from New York City by way of Central America, which is usually my formal introduction to people so that they understand, though I live in this very beautiful mountain town on the surface, very aesthetically gorgeous in the Blue Ridge Mountains. I am very much the city girl, born from parents who are actually Spanish. So a lot of people, and I do move through the world understanding that I am often mislabeled because most people look at me and don't realize that I'm actually a Latina. Um, and how I choose to show up in the world is as a guide and a catalyst. I work predominantly within the wellness field. So as a yoga teacher, a certified life mastery coach, I usually combine those skills along with my own spiritual tools and rituals to help people with transformation. And one path of the work that I do that I'm very passionate about is health, healing, and wellness for communities who are very much experiencing disparities, whether it's racial inequities or health inequities. And I love using the tools of yoga and drawing people into conversations about what wellness looks like for everyone. So, yeah, that's my
Big work.
passion.
Yeah, big work in the world and necessary.
Yes, very, very necessary, and just does not feel like an option to me not to do. So it's not really work. And when I first started my business, that's how I used to introduce myself to people. I would always say to them, it's not about what I do, it's actually who I am. So I feel very blessed to have been called to a path of healing. So most people like me would identify themselves as a healer. However, how my magic shows up in the world of healing takes the form of um, a person who holds space for others to access their own healing. Sometimes that feels really good, and sometimes that feels very challenging for some people.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And it's a lot to hold, right?
It's uh, this is why I love you. Yes, it is a lot to hold because it's very varied. So I'm walking into spaces where people are in just a different mirage of spaces and time with their own healing. So it often requires that I'm always doing my own healing because so much comes up, right, when we're in spaces like that. And it also requires that I spend a lot of time staying very close to my own personal truth and my own ritual and my own healing and ancestors. So, thus, the reason why I moved to a mountain town. I'm very much attached to the element of earth. It's very grounding for me. So I love it. I do.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Speaking of healing and holding space, I am wondering how your heart is feeling in the midst of coronavirus, COVID-19, all that is going on in this particular moment.
You know, that it seems to be the $1 million question right now for us. Boy, I tell you, Corona, she just decided to show up uninvited, I think. Crash the party. So, at first when this all kicked off, I have a saying, this is the New Yorker in me, that when crisis hits, we either focus or we fold. And I found myself focusing very laser specific on my community here because I'm well versed in just what the health disparities are for communities of color, and the fact that businesses were being shut down. And at the time, there was not a whole lot of information. We just knew that we were about to walk into a very challenging time. And I definitely went into, how are my people doing? What do they need? And most interestingly, though, within the first 7 days of it, after that, I was definitely pulled back. And I recognized that I was being pulled back energetically in terms of, now take care of yourself. And so I've been doing a lot of yoga, working a lot with breath, meditation, um, and really actually being very intentional about where I open myself up energetically. So whether that's the people that I talk to, or even information on social media, I knew very instinctively that it was almost a time for cocooning. And that felt almost counterintuitive, though, to my ego and to my brain, because I'm so used to being boots on the ground, ground zero, helping everyone else. But for some reason, once I made sure certain groups within our community, work that I had already been working on, were stabilized, I recognized that I needed to then root myself down. So I've been taking a lot of hikes in the Blue Ridge Mountains, social distancing. There's nobody out there, believe it or not, at least when I go, spending time journaling and just being the witness, like really observing all of my own stuff that's coming up with it, right? Stuff around trust and surrender, um, and sitting with just this very deep peace and knowing that this too shall pass, but also sitting with new levels of trust that it's going to be okay, because though I'm aware it will pass, I'm still not seeing all of how and who we will be once this has passed. So there's that part of it as well.
You mentioned New York, which I knew, and as we know,
Ooh,
I mean, it has been hit so hard with this pandemic, and you
yeah.
have people there, and so I'm wanting to check in to see how your people are doing and how you're feeling, right? Because
Yeah.
I just think that's a different relationship to, I don't have many people in New York, right? It's just a different relationship if you have people in these places where thousands of people are transitioning from this
Yeah.
virus.
I'm so oh, one of the reasons why I love you. Thank you for saying that and honoring that, because though I'm physically in Asheville, North Carolina, and yes, COVID-19 is definitely hitting our community, but it's hitting very differently. And this is going to come up further in our conversation, that what I'm observing, that myself included are having to learn, is to honor the experience that everyone is having with COVID-19, because it is very different from person to person, county to county, state to state. I get to walk in to the Blue Ridge Mountains and go for miles, right? But yes, I have family that are like designated family, which means they've been friends to me for over 30 years, who haven't left their apartment in 2 weeks, who are filled with fear because there are so many cases. I've already had someone in my family actually transition, two people, cousins of ours. Um, the son passed away on a Thursday last week, and his father transitioned on Sunday, literally from the anxiety and the brokenheartedness, like just gave out. And until you mentioned that, to be honest with you, I think there was a part of me that put that in the recess of my mind. So I'm holding a myriad of experiences, because I lived most of my life in New York. That's where I grew up. And so holding that grief, I often find myself full of tears after talking to friends who have been in the hospital with COVID-19, who are doctors in the hospitals. serving the people. Michelle, it is, I often feel like I'm calling Mars. Like we joke just to keep it light that like it feels like the Twilight Zone, because when I'm speaking to my community here in Asheville, it feels more of like keeping people's spirits bolstered. But when I'm talking to friends in New York, it is heavy. It is very grief laden. It is very fear ridden. And it's just, I cannot believe the stark differences of the experiences. Um, and yeah, it's heartbreaking because we can't actually have a funeral, you know. And when I look on, you know, when I talk to my friends about the rare times they are able to go out and they notice trucks, ice packing trucks that are being parked behind the hospitals because of the hundreds of bodies, it's just like, even now as I'm talking it, I can feel my heart just squeeze. Do you know what I mean? And I don't know if it's because we've gone through 9/11, and so that was extremely traumatic, because at that time in our space and time in history of America, New York, America had never experienced anything like that since Pearl Harbor. And now this, there's nothing more to do than to you just sit with it. That's all that you can do, is just sit with it, and realizing that life will never be the same, you know? And that just, it's a difficult sensation to feel, but it is definitely grief. And for me, I feel like I'm sitting in a space of, you know, when you go through those various stages of grief, I feel like I'm sitting in the stage of like acceptance, where it's so overwhelming and so heavy that you know, you have no energy to resist it, to deny it. You just with it, like, okay, you know, what are you gonna do? Pray
Mhm.
and just keep taking one breath at a time. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. And I mean, obviously, my heart is with you and your loved ones everywhere, but you know, specifically in New York, just the people that you know who are being impacted in a different way than perhaps I am, right? And others who are not in that space or spaces that are being impacted more. And you're talking about grief in the heart, and I'm sitting with it, and I'm wondering why you feel like it's important for yourself and for us as a collective to acknowledge the grief that's coming up in this particular moment, because we're experiencing something, at least I've never experienced anything like this before, right? It feels new in some ways. It feels very new. So why do you think it's important for us to acknowledge the grief that's present and arising?
You know, I can speak from a few lenses of that. The first part of me wanted to speak to that as a guide and as a teacher. And then I thought, well, as a soul having a human experience, I just know that grief to me is about loss, right? And what many people don't know, and I can feel myself growing extremely emotional as I'm about to bring her into this conversation, is my mom. So my mom transitioned 2 years ago. And I'd like to think that her transitioning was timed to almost teach me and my family about how to move through grief, because that was absolutely the most painful thing I have ever gone through, mind, body, and soul. Like it just ravaged me in a way that my mind couldn't even conceive of such pain until I had stepped into that. And what I know from that, and I know from this experience, is that grief to me is almost like an honoring of the relationship, of the way of being that the soul recognizes will no longer be. So for a long time, I think as a young adult, I had all these ideas of grief, like, oh, it's about resistance and not wanting to accept. And I'm not saying that is not the lived experience for some people, right? But now as I've evolved to this point in my life, I think I recognize it more as an honoring. I grieve because I will miss what used to be, what no longer is. And I feel like there's almost a beauty in that. that there's no shame in crying and even being angry about it, right? Whatever comes up, being with that, because if we don't, these emotions, they stay in our bodies. Okay. So that brings in for me a whole other level of conversation, because if we're not moving the grief through our bodies, then it stays in our bodies, and that will make us sick eventually. And why that for me is the other importance. So it's twofold. It's an honoring, it's a respect, right? Okay. And in part of that honoring and respect is making sure that as long as I'm continuing to move through this earth, right? Our ancestors were very big on storytelling. So it's important for me to engage in that grief, to honor, and to also make sure that I stay strong and well, so then I can be the one to move forward for generations to come, to hold those stories, to remind our people, whether it's one-on-one relationships within our immediate family, our communities, or in our nation as a whole, to remind us of the time of remember where we've come from. Remember the strength. Remember the wisdom from that lived experience. And yes, continue to remember those who were with us in physical form, because as long as we speak their name, they're always with us. And that to me holds such great power. And I'll even admit, Michele, there's a part of me that even sits with this heaviness of like, to really sit with the knowledge of the thousands and thousands of souls who have transitioned because of this. I just, I'm aware of some levels of grief of what others may be experiencing from having lost my mom, but for it to happen on such a global scale, these times I know we keep saying this word, this time is so unprecedented, but it really and truly is. We have never as a global nation really gone through anything like this, not since the early days of our country, of our world. And so that's why it's important, because I think it's a way of honoring and a way of healing as well. And you have to do both.
Thank you. I feel like I heard your mom speaking through you as you answered that question, and probably other ancestors speaking through you too. Yeah. What's your mom's name?
My mom's name is Sandra Amalia Aguilar Edwards. I know people often are like, they'll look at me and they go, so how did you come up with Michele, Bridget? I'm like, don't ask.
Yeah. Thank you for calling her name into the space and bringing her into the space. Yeah. I want to ask about something you named earlier around how we're experiencing this COVID-19 in a different way, like based on where we live, our identities, we're experiencing it in a different way. And I just wonder if you would share more about that, just your understanding of that, because some people are saying, we're having the same experience, and on one level we are, right? As you spoke about, like globally, we're experiencing this pandemic. And on another level, we're actually not experiencing this in the same way at all. And so I just wonder if you'd share some about that, your perspective about that.
You know, and I'll share it to you from a personal and an observant point of view. It's interesting because I'm sitting in my car, because I'm going to go hiking after this. So as a woman of color, I have my own business, right? And so I can say from my lived experience, I am experiencing COVID-19 as someone who relies on my business for my livelihood, right? And even though I grew up in New York and very much trained from the dirt and grime, I mean, everyone knows New York City it's a hustling kind of city. Living here in Asheville, I don't have access to a lot, despite what people think, right? For me to have attained the level of success that I have has actually required on me collaborating with quite a bit, and most specifically collaborating with people who have access. And so I've had to be worried about where I'm going to live, because I actually had an experience where my living situation changed very rapidly. Okay. So let me break that down. I don't come from a family that has land, right? So I don't have relatives who just happen to have this big house where I could just say, oh, I'm just going to go live with relatives and I'm just going to stay with them and whatever the case may be. Um, my father is still alive. He's retired. He's in another state, right? Um, and I'm very much watching as contracts disappear because of COVID-19, right? And despite what people think, and even despite the collaboration, I've had to be concerned about how am I going to pay my bills, right? The security of all of that has shifted. Okay. Meanwhile, I observe and I know personally people who have not been marginalized and oppressed, who are not identified as Black and Brown, who have access to generational wealth, whether that's real estate, people that they know they can go to, who just happen to have a couple of $100s in the bank that they can go and just buy out a portion, like just wipe out 2 shelves of groceries. I'm gonna keep it very real, Mish. My sister got mad at me the other day because she was like, why is it every time you call home, I feel like you are in your car? Why are you leaving the house? And I literally had to say to her, because I don't have the privilege to just in one trip drop $300 worth of groceries. I have to go out because I have limited funds. And so I'm relying on that. So that even influences the way that I move. People of color have, let me tell you something, in Asheville, North Carolina, people of color are predominantly in the service-based industry. And our county has decided that, McDonald's drive-through and Starbucks, they are essential businesses, which to me rocks my world, right? So they're exposing themselves to people who may or may not have this virus. So I'm a little bit like, that's very interesting to me. Being able to isolate, or rather, excuse me, being able to physical distance in your home, that's a privilege. What many people don't understand, and this is not casting blame because it's just the reality, it's the construct of the reality that this country is made of, is that many homes are riddled with trauma. Some of them often riddled even with abuse. I mean, there are families that being asked to stay in your home, some of these homes are, let's keep it real. They don't live in 4-bedroom, 4.5 bathroom homes where having 5 and 6 people in a house is a luxury. No, it's not. And because of that, yes, everyone's not having the same lived experience. To keep it very frank, for some people, oftentimes, this tends to be for white or white passing people. This feels like an inconvenience, almost like a vacation. And for other people, they are literally scared for their lives. They've lost their jobs or they're being exposed, and they're having now to support their children with online schooling, and English is not their first language, or they may have spotty Wi-Fi. Their worlds have been turned upside down. And let's not mention the stress and anxiety that even triggers, or rather that resurfaces trauma that's already there. So yeah, it's a very different lived experience, very different.
I'm so glad you spoke to all the different layers and levels, both of privilege and oppression that are showing up in this moment. And I'm aware that I was having a conversation with a friend yesterday and was thinking about what you just named, about it being a privilege to be able to both have a house, right, and stay in a house, right, and to be able to practice physical distancing, but then to go out to get fast food if I actually don't want to cook dinner. But then I'm potentially exposing people who have less income, who are likely Black and Brown, right, to a virus, and they have no choice but to go to work because they need to pay their bills, right? Where it's just like, I need to go get a hamburger. This is not real. I'm not doing this, but I'm thinking about the people
Yes.
just to let people know I'm actually not doing that, but just there are people doing that and who feel inconvenienced without actually thinking about all the different things you just named. So I think it's important for people to understand more about their location, their identities, and how they're positioned in this particular moment. And
Right.
to really center that we are not having the same lived experience as you named.
Not at all. And it's funny that you should say that, because even as I say that, I sit as a woman of privilege, because I, to some degree, can still go into the Blue Ridge and go hiking. I have families who that's not an option because that's gas.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And like, it's even down to the little things in terms of finances. It's like, I go to the grocery store and everything is wiped out. And based on whatever my lived experience is, I have families that even to be able to purchase chicken or meat, like, I've only got but this much. I can only buy this. I've got to make it last for families. Like, yeah, it's a privilege. And I witnessed it because when this reality first hit us, I just didn't even know what to say when I noticed lines of people who were literally just from their own place of fear, which is trauma as well, right? It's a mindset of scarcity,
Mm-hmm.
wiping out everything out of the grocery stores and not even thinking twice about what would be left for those who barely have anything as it is. What's left for them to buy? It's really, one thing I will say, this virus has provided a really good opportunity. It has completely exposed where our systems, where the disparities show up, right? And it has completely, like, I don't even know how to express it, like, completely stripped down, naked, bare those who really stand within their being, right? That they really hold a consciousness of equity, versus those who have become really good at talking the talk. But when lack or scarcity hit their reality, right, and their own sense of safety became questionable, what and who were the first things that they thought of? And I observed that very closely, Michele, very
Mm-hmm.
closely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I think I have two more questions. You named some practices you're working with just as you are navigating this moment.
yeah.
And you named yoga and breathing and journaling. And I'm wondering if there are other rituals or practices. I know you connect with your ancestors and have a practice based
Right,
on that. If there are other rituals or practices you want to name, because I think when we name them, they might actually support other people.
right, right. So one of the things that so here's a couple of things that I've engaged in that I highly recommend for others to explore. But before I share those, here's what I want to say about how to stay well, right, through a pandemic, how to keep deep peace through a pandemic. It sounds really cliche, but it really is true, because this is why I want to say this. It's different for everyone. So what works for me may not work for someone else. But I want to encourage everyone to take what energy you do have, to lean into curiosity and feel into what actually gives your whole being, mind, body, and soul, a sense of peace, even if that peace just feels like just a few nanoseconds to just breathe and exhale, like a release from your body. And I'm going to be very transparent and say, I don't care what shape or form that takes, do it. One thing that I will say is, and it's interesting how healing and ritual, whatever the word is you want to use, it looks like something very different, right? So I've engaged in community Zoom dates, right? Connecting with people, not just anybody, but with people who are kind of resonating where I'm at, that fill my spirit. Like you're one of those people, like just being able to talk with you, it's like, okay, I feel so much better now in my body. Like it just brings me joy. Have, schedule weekly family dates or something like that, whatever it takes, dance parties. This for me is very ancestral. I cannot move my body and not be filled with joy. It's just impossible. And it may seem a little kooky, like, oh, okay, that's just weird. But I promise you this, and let me be clear, dancing is not just a form of, it's healing. But sometimes don't be surprised if that dancing elicits a sense of happiness, joy, or bliss, or if it elicits deep mourning and tears come, because it's really a way of moving energy through the body. So oftentimes walking in the woods, some of us are very elemental, right? So whether it's water, woods, if you have access, right? If it's sitting by a fire, if it's going out into nature, if you're somehow near a beach, which, to be very transparent, I don't know what the protocol right now is about being at the beaches. Maybe there's a lake, but indulge in those things that give you release in your body. And I want to be clear that that release does not always mean I'm trying to be happy while I'm doing it. Sometimes it just means it's a space where you can deeply feel sadness or grief and allow it to move through your body. Because let me be frank, it's not all the times that I go hiking or when I'm meditating or when I'm even moving through an asana and a yoga flow that I'm always in this state of bliss. Sometimes deep sadness hits me and it comes out through my eyes, through my tears, right? And sometimes when I'm walking through the woods, I'm just fervently speaking to ancestors and praying, and I feel the heaviness, but I allow those things to move through me. So whether it's journaling, pulling oracle cards, sitting by a body of water, burning a fire at night, sitting around there, whatever it is, dancing, moving your body, sometimes singing. Let me tell you, I caught on Facebook. Okay, Shoshana Bean, I believe that's her name. Shoshana Bean is a singer, Broadway singer.
Mm-hmm.
And the woman, her name is escaping me, who played the lead role in Harriet the movie, right? They did a duet the other night on a Facebook Live where they were singing Believe from an old Disney movie of the Prince of Egypt. Let me tell you, woman, listening to those two women sing just moved my spirit in such a way I had to send it to everybody I knew.
Mm-hmm.
But that was very healing. It was very inspiring. And so whatever it is that allows you to bring yourself back home to a sense of wholeness, groundedness, and a peace that transcends all understanding, do that, no matter what it looks like.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I love that. Thank you for teaching us more about how to be at peace during this time. And my last question is, which was not on your list, but just came to me, and it is, what lesson is COVID-19 teaching you today?
Wow. I paused only because my first thought was like, which one do I pick?
Just in this moment, like today, right? In this moment.
In this moment, surrender, a new level of surrender and trust. And the way that looks for me is sitting in this space of deep knowing that it is what it is, but all really is well.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I know for some that might sound a little like woo-woo, so I'll try to give some legs underneath that. What it feels like in the surrender is, even in this midst of uncertainty, right? Because I am transparently saying, for all that I know and all the wisdom that I've garnered and have, that even I'm sitting with a level of like, oh my gosh, like, where are we headed, right?
Mm-hmm.
That even in the midst of all of that, that I can still have a peace, that I can still have a sense of groundedness, a sense of purpose. even if that groundedness and that purpose, the face of that has changed, has shifted. Um, and it feels very strange because I'm definitely one of those people when it's like crisis, focus, serve, help. But I'm in this space of just sitting with what is, and trusting that, yeah, in the moment. And I think that's very hard for us because we're so used to doing that. What this opportunity has taught me in this moment is what has really shifted is really embodying what it means to be, really be in a state of being, as opposed to scurrying and doing and doing and doing. Because for many of us, how that looks has changed. So that's what it looks like for me. That's the lesson right now, is a deep sense of surrender. Yeah.
Thank you so much for all of the wisdom you dropped today in this conversation, and for who you are in the world, and all the joy and light you bring, and the groundedness, right? And the realness. So I love you, and I appreciate who you are, and appreciate you making time for this. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Of course, I'm biased. Any chance I get for us to talk, which is why I know in the beginning I was like, let's start recording, because I know if we talk too long, it's just going to naturally flow. So I am very grateful for your wisdom and your foresight in creating this space, because it is very much needed. And I'm just so grateful that we decided to do this thing called life together, babe. Such an honor.
I know it is an honor. I love you too. Thank you, Mish.
You're welcome.
You are beautiful. You are your beauty. Ready, crack open. What?